WCLN 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. We appreciate you looking at us today on WCLN radio and TV. It's almost like we're simulcast here at the same time. Folks, gets mixed up, but it's kind of hard to see us. But you can see us on WCLN radio and TV because Star Vision is connected with the radio station, and you're viewing us now if it's Tuesday, 2:30 to 3:30 on both radio and TV. If it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m., you're watching us on Star Vision TV, and Star Vision itself has a TV station that they call Star TV, so don't get confused. It's all Channel 16. So Channel 16, Star TV, Star Vision, WCLN 1170 Radio, and we're coming to you today with a very special guest. Got here from Raleigh, believe it or not, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. June Atkinson. Dr. Atkinson, thank you for taking time to be here. I know your busy schedule has hopefully slowed down a little bit because there's some folks that have left town up there called the legislature.
Right. Well, JW, thank you so much for having me with you today. I really enjoy talking with people who want our citizens to know about what is happening in education and in other parts of our North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. I want to kind of touch on your background a little bit. Obviously, you came to us from Virginia.
Right.
You've got your academic credentials. Some of those are in Virginia. Your doctorate degree from North Carolina State University.
Correct.
You married a doctor from Cary, an orthodontist.
Right.
Who is also assistant professor over at Chapel Hill, I understand. You attend the United Methodist Church. Just an interesting track record, but the thing that's kind of interesting to me is that when we think about the schools and we look at the state superintendent, do we really think about over 1.5 million students? Do we think about over 2,500 public schools in North Carolina? That's a huge responsibility. Kind of tell us what, I guess, compelled you, even though you spent some time, in a supervisory position with the public schools in North Carolina, what kind of compelled you to say, I want to step into this position as state superintendent?
Well, when I made the decision to run for state superintendent, I felt that our state needed to move forward in having a nearly 100% graduation rate, and that we needed to make some changes in public education, and that we also needed to carry on some of the traditions that were really making a difference for our 1.5 million children. So I had some women friends who said, June, you love education, you enjoy teaching, you believe in what we have been doing, why don't you run for state superintendent? So a small group of women said, June, please run, and if you run, we'll support you. So the next thing I know, I am filing to run for state superintendent. And I had never, ever run for a political office. Of course, I voted every year, but I had not been involved in a race whatsoever. So it was a wonderful learning experience for me to run for state superintendent in 2004. And here I am, serving my third term.
And it's interesting when you look at that, you're kind of a first in a couple of areas. Obviously, one of the first females that has been state superintendent here in North Carolina. And then there's a thing that I don't want to spend that much time on, but I feel compelled to kind of allude to. Back in 2009 came to fruition this somewhat of a combative thing that you had to settle in court as to whether we had a state superintendent that we elected. And a lot of folks would ask me, in fact, we try to do a little promo of who our guest is going to be, and a lot of folks would ask me, say, well, ask her why we got into that kind of issue to start with. And I know Governor Perdue was there at that time, and I think she had an idea that she needed, for lack of a better word, an education czar that would answer to the executive branch. How did that shape for you? And how has it helped us in North Carolina to kind of solidify this publicly elected superintendent versus an appointed position?
This all goes back to the North Carolina Constitution. The North Carolina Constitution says that the State Board of Education shall have the responsibility for administering and supervising public schools. It also states that the elected state superintendent shall be responsible for the administration and supervision of the Department of Public Instruction. So when Governor Perdue decided to appoint a chief executive officer that would run the Department of Public Instruction, I felt that that was an unconstitutional move. And I believe, because this has been brewing over the years, that it was time to ask the courts to intervene and to determine who has a responsibility to run the Department of Public Instruction, to carry out the policies of the State Board of Education and the laws of North Carolina. So as a result of that action by the governor, I filed a suit, and in July of that year, 2009, a Superior Court judge ruled in my favor, saying that the state superintendent is elected by the people, and therefore the state superintendent has a responsibility for running the Department of Public Instruction to carry out the policies of the State Board of Education. And to Dr. Harrison, the person who is appointed as the CEO, he continued to be the State Board of Education chair. And in the ensuing years, he and I worked together in a very collaborative way, and I appreciate his working with me, and I know that he appreciates my working with him to do the best that we could for the 1.5 million children. I felt, though, that it was very important that since I was an elected official, that I filed that suit, because the people of North Carolina elected me as state superintendent. And should the people of North Carolina decide at another point that they want a superintendent to be appointed by the State Board of Education or the governor, then it is important for a constitutional amendment to go forth so that the people of North Carolina can make that decision.
Do you ever see that happening? I mean, do you get feedback from your constituency that says, you know, we're glad you're there, and we just, you know, we don't ever see that happening again, and they really don't understand it? Because, quite frankly, a lot of folks will say to me, I just really don't understand why that came up to start with.
Yes. Well, I run into a lot of people at different restaurants, and they ask the question, why did that ever happen? I know that when a survey was done about whether a superintendent should be elected or appointed, overwhelmingly, about 66% of the people said we want to elect the state superintendent. And I have not seen any polls since that poll, which was done several years ago. So it really is a decision of the people to decide whether they want to have an elected superintendent or an elected insurance commissioner, an elected attorney general, an elected lieutenant governor. The people make that decision, and I felt compelled to represent the people when I filed that lawsuit.
Well, it seems that was two biggies. I mean, the first female superintendent, and secondly, not only that, but you stood your ground and showed folks that you could make a difference, and apparently the court agreed with you. I want to kind of cut to the chase on some of this stuff now. The legislature's out of town. I want to read a comment from Representative Greg Horn, District 68 up in Union County, and this was published in the paper, and it's also a legislative communication. And this is a quote from him. It says, "Just enacted budget bill spends more money on education than ever been spent in education in North Carolina. $11.5 billion out of $20.6 billion in the budget, 56%, including more than $18 billion for school security, safety, crisis planning." And the budget increases K-12 2.1% compared to 2013, and actual spending $15.3 billion in 2013, 15.1 billion in 2014, 2015. How do you respond to that in light of what we know now when we're looking at education? Because a lot of folks see comments and say, well, you know, they're getting plenty of money, what's the problem?
Okay.
Just give us your feedback on that.
Okay, and I'm going to speak just for public schools in kindergarten through grade 12.
That's fine.
It is true that more money, more dollars are being spent in public education this coming school year than the previous year. But there are some factors that people need to consider. One is that when school starts, we will have about 17,000 more students enrolled in our schools than we did last year. So I bring up that point because there are several ways to figure how what our commitment to our 1.5 million children is. One is to look at the total dollars. Another is to look at the amount of money being spent per child. And when you take into consideration that we have 17,000 more students in our schools this year, and then when you look back over the past 5 to 6 years, we have over 30,000 more students in our schools. So what we are seeing is that we have a smaller amount of money being spent per child, and that is a trend that started approximately 5 years ago, and it continues to go downward. So a part of that money goes to areas for which we pay the longevity of teachers or retirement into that fund. What that means is that those dollars really do not go directly to the student in the classroom. We know that the textbooks, for example, an average textbook costs anywhere from $55 to $65. In the budget, we now have just $12 to $14 per student for textbooks. When you look at teacher salaries, we see that our teacher salaries have remained the same over the past 5 years, except for a 1.5% increase last year. So when people debate whether we have spent more money for children, whether we have more dollars, the big message is you got to look at different ways of the budget. So when people say it's more money, more dollars, they are correct. One is because of paying into the retirement for our teachers. But when you look at the bottom line of how much money is being spent per child, then we see it's less today than it has been in the last 5 to 6 years.
We're going to take a break now, and we're going to come back and continue the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching We Should Know. We're talking to the State Superintendent of Public Schools, Dr. June Atkinson. We're talking about critical issues facing you and your children. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. I want to thank all those folks that send us emails, make comments about previous shows. Thank you for your comments from last week. Dr. Huff, I thought, did an excellent job on his surgical explanation of various body parts that we had on the show. I thank Dr. Huff for not only doing that, for sponsoring this show as well. I want to give a shout out to all the teachers out there today, all those folks that are in public schools, whether you're an administrator, classroom teacher, but particularly the classroom teachers, and want to thank them from us to you for dedicating your life and career to serving children and serving our society through teaching children. Today we have with us the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, June Atkinson, Dr. June Atkinson. Most folks, when they refer to you, say June Atkinson. And, you know, when you look at the literature, you see clearly, you know, your doctorate degree from state, exemplary, over 35 years in education. How does that happen? The folks, do you just prefer that? But it's like people just kind of use that as a preference rather than saying Dr. Atkinson.
Well, I feel very comfortable with anything that someone calls me, as long as it's not a bad name. Mm-hmm. And many people call me Miss June, others call me Dr. June. My husband calls me Junie. I want people to feel comfortable in using a name for which they feel comfortable. And many people say Dr. Atkinson, but others say Miss June, and others just say June. So.
Absolutely. Well, I know that you do have a good rapport with folks, and you tend to come across like, you know, folks that people have known for a long time, and I'm hoping they're getting that sense as they're looking at this show today. As we went off a while ago for the first break, we were talking about the dollars spent on education in North Carolina, and I think we agree that there has been more money, more dollar amount spent in public education, and a huge chunk of the state budget is in education.
Right.
So it would leave us then to the discussion that we were having, what's happening to the money and what are we missing? Because it seems to be that if we have spent this money, and from the information I just read, these billions of dollars, let's get back into that discussion just for a moment and talk about that.
Okay, well, let's relate it to a family. Let's say that there's a family of 6, and that family has been getting $6 to buy food. And then someone decides to give that family another $1 to buy food. but at the same time that family increases by 5. So when you look at that situation, even though they have gotten more money, they have less money per child to buy food. And that's a situation that we face, all of our school districts face this year, because they will be getting more money in some respects, but yet they will have fewer dollars per child. And that's one of the reasons that you will see throughout North Carolina and this region and others, that school districts will be saying, well, we have to cut 10 teachers, or we have to eliminate some of our teacher assistants, or we won't be able to hire a school counselor. We know one left, but we won't be able to hire them. So our school districts are having to stretch more less money per child to serve more students.
Even though the budget shows more money, there's more people to serve, so it takes less.
Right.
Okay, so as we look at that and think about moving forward with education in North Carolina, especially public school education, in some areas of the state, particularly the county that you're in now, Sampson County, and there's surrounding counties, there's a huge influx, and you talked about a number of increase in students. A lot of those students are Latino students,
right,
which brings on additional challenges to teachers. How are we dealing with that in the state as you look at all these schools, 2,500 plus schools in the state? How are the schools that deal with that more than there's other places, I guess, demographically they have more Latinos, but particularly these counties with more? How is the teachers dealing with that? And what kind of impediment to teaching does it create for the teacher?
Well, first of all, when we have students who have English as a second language, then we have to make the connection from the native language to English. So one of our first big challenges is to teach children English if they do not know English. And we have traditionally dealt with that issue by having limited English proficient teachers working alongside of our regular teachers. So that has been a traditional approach that we have had. Unfortunately, some of the dollars have been removed from the budget to support students who have English as a second language. Another way that we are trying to deal with that issue in a forward-thinking way is that this school year we're rolling out what we're calling Home Base. Home Base is a place where teachers can go via internet to get lesson plans and to get support to help them to be more efficient in the classroom and to really save them time. And so a part of that internet-like support will be support for students who have English as a second language. For example, let's say in math, we're going to talk about the Pythagorean theorem, or we're going to talk about fractions, and there's certain words that students would need to know, that this is how you say those words in Spanish and this is how you say it in English. And so the students would have access to a preview and would be able to learn the English words before having that math class. This is a challenge for us. We know that in some of our school districts, a way of dealing with the issue is to teach students both English and Spanish in the same class. So the students who don't know Spanish will learn English, and the students who don't know English, well, I've gotten that confused. But the students will learn both Spanish and English in the same class. And we've seen some really successful programs in our state, especially in Union County, which is right outside of the Charlotte area, where you have first graders and kindergarten students who can speak both in English and in Spanish. And we know that having or learning multiple languages really is good for the brain. It exercises the brain, and then it does contribute to student learning at later years.
And I think we have to kind of give a little bit of accolades to those Latino-speaking students that are in the classroom, because quite a few of those folks are excelling even with the challenge of trying to learn, from another language, and you have to put yourself in the same situation. If you were in Mexico or somewhere and you were trying to learn, and the only thing you heard was Spanish or Latino or whatever, it would be like, how are we going to do this? So very talented kids in those classrooms.
Oh, absolutely, and we're so pleased that when we look at our graduation rate of students who are of Hispanic, Latino origin, we see that they have increased the graduation rate from 2005-2006 by over 24 points. So we know that there are children who are extremely eager to learn, and we know that North Carolina will depend on those on children and students who are in our schools. So we need to make sure that we do a great job of educating them, because they will be our future workers, and we need to continue that focus.
It's something I want to spend some time on, and I think probably as much time as we can on this during this show. We could probably talk about it for 2 or 3 hours. In fact, you could probably do 3 days on it, and we could just have break sessions and sleepovers. But something called the Common Core state standards. It's getting a lot of attention. I know you've been recently on David Crabtree at WREL, and it's been a lot of information in the news media regards to Common Core. And the confusing part of that for people, I think, is when you do the reading, there's a lot of it makes sense because it deals with people and students being folks that be able to deal with situations and apply principles and handle outcomes effectively, which most folks say is the correct thing to do. Where's the glitch here? What are we missing that there seems to be some pushback on that?
Okay, well, let me just start by just giving a brief background of how North Carolina develops standards. North Carolina, for at least 50 years, through the direction of the General Assembly, develops a standard course of study. A standard course of study identifies what students should know and be able to do as a result of being in school for 13 years. And in the 2007-2008 school year, we had a commission that says we need to change our standards of what students should know and be able to do, because there are many more demands on our students. There's a higher level of education required. So let's revise the standards. At the same time, chief state school officers, people like me who are in other states, came together in 2008 and 2009, and we said, you know what, 50 states develop standards. Some do it at the local level, some do it at the state level. Why don't we get together and have the best people, the best minds come together in just 2 subject areas, English language arts reading and mathematics. And let's see if we can work together to develop standards. So North Carolina was a part of that initiative. In fact, I was one of the superintendents at the meeting. We had the National Governors Association. At that time, the former governor of Georgia was a vice chair or a co-chair of the committee. So we came together and we said, let's try it. So we did. We had great people developing the standards of what students should know and be able to do. And North Carolina had opportunity to give much feedback. In fact, we had thousands and thousands of people corresponding with what needed to be changed. So ultimately, in 2010, the State Board of Education adopted the Common Core standards. So what are the Common Core standards? Let me start with math. The Common Core standards, if you just boil them down to the essence of them, the standards say that every child graduating from our schools should know how to add, multiply, subtract, divide, use percentages, decimals, and fractions, and they should be able to apply algebraic, geometric, and statistical functions in the world of work in further education. For example, let's take the 3rd grade. In the 3rd grade, it says that our students should learn their multiplication tables. And not only should they learn their multiplication tables, they should memorize the multiplication tables. And then the next question is, of what good is it if you know your multiplication tables, but you don't know when to multiply? So the Common Core standards say, not only do you have to learn how to memorize, but you have to apply those memorizations.
We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and talk more about the Common Core standards. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching We Should Know. We're talking with the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. June Atkinson. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. You're watching and listening to the show called We Should Know. We try to keep it information and education oriented. Not a better person in the state could help us keep it on that track than the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. June Atkinson. Dr. Atkinson, again, for the third time, thank you for being here. I cannot imagine your schedule, but we have captured you here to sit down with us for a short period of time in the studio to talk about some big issues in education. We've talked about, in previous segments on this show, we talked about the dollar amount, what the legislature allocated. Looks good, but when you dispense it out, it gets kind of weak, according to your comments. The thing we're talking about now is this Common Core state standards and how they were developed. And I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. You mentioned that it was put together by people like yourself from states, superintendents, others, to bring it together as a national recognition of that. And so as we move forward, let's keep that in mind. But you were just explaining what they were. What are these core standards, these Common Core standards? And you were talking about the math part of it.
Right. Well, first of all, the standards are on our website, so people can read what we expect our kindergartners to learn, our first graders, second graders, etc. But they really, many people say, I've received a few letters saying we should be teaching our students how to add, multiply, subtract, divide, do fractions, percentages, and this Common Core doesn't do that. In reality, that is the core of the Common Core, that students be able to use math when they need it. I'll give you a good example. My nephew and I will often go to the mall. And so on one side of the mall, we'll see a sign that says, buy one and get 50% off for the second one. And then across the hall, it will say 25% off. Well, right there is a place where you would apply math. Which is the better deal, or is it the same deal? So, unfortunately, there have been a lot of things piled on to the Common Core which really don't necessarily need to be connected or are connected. And then when you go to English Language Arts Reading, the Common Core says that all students should be able to read and comprehend by grade 3. All students should be able to read complex documents such as the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and should be able to write about those documents by using evidence from reading those documents. It also requires students to learn how to speak, and heaven only knows students and all of us need the skill of learning how to listen. And the Common Core really focuses on those skills. The Common Core requires that we teach the classics in literature, drama, poems, and it also requires that the students be able to read for information. I'll give you an example. A lease for an apartment. We want our students to be able to read a lease for an apartment and know what it says. We want our students to be able to read insurance documents and know what it says. And we want people to be able to read the technical manuals that one would need to make a digital device work. So it has a balance between reading of the classics, Shakespeare, American writers, and reading for information. They really are good for our students. They're good to ensure that our students are career, college, and citizenship ready. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Governor McCrory has endorsed the Common Core standards and why the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce has endorsed the Common Core standards.
It meets all the basic principles of what expectation would be from a person that's supposed to be educated, especially in the public school system.
That's exactly right. And parents can know ahead of time by just reading the standards of what their children are to learn in kindergarten. So they're very open to everyone. Our teachers tell us that they are more rigorous, there are fewer topics so they can go deep into a subject, and they allow them the time to have that application, such as the one that I just mentioned with John Robert, my nephew, at the mall. Absolutely. Situation.
To kind of cut to the chase, one of the things that I think has happened is that the Obama administration has tied these core course principles to their race to the top example of education. Has that created a partisan political process by the administration doing that? Has it created this ripple effect that you're getting some pushback from the partisan political folks?
Well, it's important to look at the chronology of the adoption of the Common Core standards in North Carolina. The State Board of Education adopted the Common Core standards before there was the opportunity to apply for a Race to the Top grant, funded through Congress and through the work of the Obama administration. So they were in existence, and they were being incubated before President Obama was elected president. Now, North Carolina was one of 11 states in the District of Columbia to get a Race to the Top grant. And the grant required us to verify that we had adopted rigorous career, college, and citizenship standards. So because the board had already adopted those standards, we said that North Carolina will be a Common Core state, and that was a part of our Race to the Top. As state superintendents, we did not want any involvement with the federal government with the standards. And you know why? Because President Bush and President Clinton had both tried to have federal standards for what students should know and be able to do. And since the state superintendents in the nation have experience in education, we didn't want to repeat a situation that we knew would not get us to a place that would be best for our students.
I think one of the things that we're talking about here too that needs to be discussed is the understanding of these Common Core standards are basic fundamentals that everyone needs to complete certain levels of education in North Carolina. They're not something that a few people at this zip code need versus somebody at another zip code. Explain the importance of that, because I think there's some confusion about, well, we don't have local input.
Yeah. Well, number one, North Carolina made the decision decades ago that we needed consistency in what students should know and be able to do, so that you would have students in one county learning just this amount, and in another county you would have students learning this amount. So that's why we have the standard course of study. And the Common Core, which is a part of the standard course of study, is to have some assurance that regardless of your zip code or your address, you will be exposed to the same rich standards as someone at another zip code. And that's very important to the thread and tradition of North Carolina.
How does these Common Core address one of Governor Corey's concerns, which is testing? He's made a couple comments about so much testing going on, and we're actually concerned more with the testing we are with the teaching and with the process of learning. How does it address that?
Well, you can have the Common Core and never have a test. But in North Carolina, because of General Assembly action, we must assess students or give end of grade and end of course tests in mathematics and English language arts in grades 3 through 8, as well as one subject in high school, English 10, and biology and math 1. So the tests that our students took last year are based on the Common Core. And I, as a student, really didn't like all the tests I had to take as a student. I didn't like to take all those tests that I had to take at NC State or Virginia Tech. But we have to look at what is the purpose of a test. The purpose of a test is to let the teacher know if the students have learned. So that is the purpose of a test. And last year we, through a part of our work, we gave tests in other areas, other than English language arts, mathematics. And one way that we could meet the governor's goal to say that we have fewer tests is to have just one test given as a final exam, rather than having the teacher-made exam and as well as an exam that a final exam that we would develop. When we talk about tests, we really do have to keep in mind what is the purpose of a test.
Absolutely. A question for you that I think is obviously on a lot of folks' mind. As superintendent, and we talk about Washington, D.C., we talk about federal funding. Clearly, for a lot of folks, federal attachment and federal control is something they don't want to get into.
Right.
As state superintendent, how do you view federal control of what goes on with education in the state versus having the federal government out of the business of education in states?
Well, I believe that the state of North Carolina, as well as the other states in our nation, have the primary responsibility for making the decisions about education. Without, however, federal dollars, we would not be as far along of serving students who live in poverty, of serving students who have special needs, of serving students who want to take vocational or career technical education. We get approximately 25% of our funding from the federal government, 65% from the state General Assembly, and then the rest would come from local dollars. When we accept ESEA, or No Child Left Behind, we accept some of the strings attached to, first of all, to have an accountability system, second, to ensure that we are providing services for all children, not just students who live in wealthy areas. And North Carolina has benefited from Title I, or No Child Left Behind dollars, to help give that extra help and assistance for especially our children who live in poverty. So to answer your question, it really is important to have a balance and to ensure that the federal government does not overstep its bounds of having states being the primary, having the primary responsibility for education.
We're going to have to take another break. Seems like time is going by fast because these are such important topics that we're getting across. But we're going to take a break and we'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching WCLN Radio, TV, Star Vision, all in one on Tuesday, 2:30 to 3:30, 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Dr. June Atkinson will be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for listening today. We're talking with the Public Instruction Director, the Superintendent, the person in charge in the state of North Carolina, Dr. June Atkinson. And we've had quite a bit of conversation on breaks today, talking about education, talking about funding. Unbelievable time spans here, Dr. Atkinson. I just can't believe time is going so fast, but we've got so many subjects and so many things to talk about in education. Maybe we need to start a series down here where you come out every quarter and we just sit down and talk about these.
I'd be happy to do that.
In talking with some of the teachers, I've had a lot of teachers, say, ask about this or ask to give an opinion on this. One of the things that comes to mind initially is pay and pay incentives. One of the things that's now on the burner that is really, to some degree, I'll use this word, infuriating to some teachers, is the fact that if they work hard, they get a master's degree or they get an advanced degree in their particular area of teaching, they don't get any pay increase for that. Speak to that and tell us what, if anything, is being done, and is that something they're just going to have to live with? I
am very dismayed that the General Assembly made the decision not to pay teachers for master's degrees effective 2014-15. We send the message to our children that you need to be lifelong learners. And so why would we not reward our teachers for being lifelong learners? I can speak from personal experience that my master's degree really helped me be a better teacher for my students. And I believe that master's degrees that our teachers are earning really will help them be better teachers for their students. It is not good political and not good policy to discontinue master's degrees payment, and I'm hopeful that when the General Assembly comes back that our teachers will be talking to their representatives and senators to say, will you please reconsider?
There are those that would say that that this whole issue of paying for advanced degrees de-incentivizes education to a degree. It doesn't give a teacher an incentive to try to go further, to do more.
Well, and I think that comment is on target. Our teachers are working so hard. They are working with fewer resources, greater challenges than they've ever faced, and we need to value our teachers. Most people don't go into education because they think that they can get rich, but they should not be considered as taking a vow of poverty. Mm-hmm. So consequently, with our being 46 in the nation with teacher pay, we need to make a priority of valuing our teachers through better compensation. And one of the ways was through the master's degree incentive for our teachers.
Tie that to tenure. You know, the tenure issue has been out there for some time. The tenure issue is something the legislature really was concerned about, making sure that, you know, bad teachers didn't continue to teach. Has that been a problem in North Carolina, quote, having bad teachers continuing to teach?
Well, the superintendents in the state tell me that it has not been a huge problem because there are 15 reasons, at least 15 reasons, teachers can be terminated. What I think that some people will say is that the process of getting rid of a bad teacher takes too long. But really, tenure for North Carolina just means that you just can't be fired because someone doesn't like you. There has to be a reason. And so the General Assembly this time put in many provisions in the budget bill dealing with teacher contracts. So our school districts will be dealing with a lot more paperwork when it comes to contracts, because 25% of the teachers can get a 4-year contract, others will get 1 year, others will get 2, others will get 3. So that will be a huge change in the way teachers get contracts to go from 1 year to the other.
Another question that often comes up throughout the state, and I know you get in some schools that have implemented different sessions, is summer schools, year-round schools, to coin a term that's often used. Is there now a look at possibly a little more, I guess, palatability, favorability in the sense of year-round schools? Because it is explained to me by some superintendents that I talked to preparing for this show that, quite frankly, they actually get the same amount of time off. It's just structured in such a way they get more time off at Christmas and those kinds of things from the school. Do you see any change in that happening throughout the state?
Well, if Chairman of the State Board of Education, Bill Kobe, and I have a big say in this, we really want to change the way that we have our school calendar. And why do we want to make a change? It's because we want to do the best things for kids. We know that every summer when students are out 2.5 months, and if that child goes home to a place where they do not have books and they do not have adults reading to them, then they lose 2.5 months to 3 months of reading achievement between kindergarten, first grade and second grade and third grade. And so that means that the teacher has to start here, and if you didn't have that long break, they could start here. And so just by virtue of that, the students lose a year's worth of progress in reading. So it really is important to have a balanced calendar where you have 185 days or 180 days distributed throughout 365 days. That would be in the best interest of our children, and that's why I am very interested in our moving forward with a balanced calendar, because it is the best thing that we can do for children without having to spend more money.
Absolutely, and I think the best interest of learning and the students is the focus of what I hear you saying we need to be looking at.
Right.
And historically, we've ended up with this summer school thing a bit because of vacation, but during the time it was done, a lot of agricultural entities in the state literally depended on student labor to carry their agricultural entities through.
Right, and now travel and tourism, people say that they depend on student work during the summers. But we can work that out, especially for elementary children, because no one who is in an elementary school should be working in travel and tourism or in agriculture.
I want to transition a bit now and talk about another issue, is a hot button out there, and I know for people that's in the school system, administrators, teachers, and others, this whole issue of charter schools and vouchers. It's there. I don't know that it's going away. In fact, the door is open wider. What kind of issue are we looking at that, and what really is the big negative impact that it might have on public schools? I mean, do you see a lot of folks, even if it were there and they'd say, well, here's your $10,000, whatever, how much money you would get for your child, do you see a lot of people just exiting the public school system and going to charter or private schools?
Well, let me address charter first.
Okay.
Charter schools first. The state General Assembly has lifted the cap. However, charter schools have to take the same end of grade, end of course test as our students in public schools. Where I really have a problem is with the scholarship voucher program. And here are the problems that I have with that. our schools starting in 2014-15 will have to be graded as an A, B, C, D, F. The private schools receiving taxpayers' dollars do not have any grading system. And if it's good enough for our public schools to be graded A through F, then it should be good enough for our private schools receiving taxpayers' dollars to be graded A through F. And if it's not good enough for the private schools receiving taxpayers' dollars, then it should not be good enough for our public schools.
What's created that imbalance?
The legislation that was passed by the General Assembly.
This year?
This year, because the legislation does not have any accountability as far as grades for private schools receiving taxpayers' dollars. The other thing is that our charter school children and our public school children have to take end of grade and end of course tests. And if they're good enough for our public schools to take those end of grade and end of course tests, then it should be good enough for our private schools receiving taxpayers' dollars. Because what we will have is that there is a requirement that students take standardized tests according to the law, but it doesn't say which standardized tests. So parents will not have any way to have a consistent measure to see how a private school is doing compared to a public school. So I believe that if we're going to have vouchers in our state of $4,200, and it probably will be raised at another time, for kids going to private schools, then we need to have the same accountability system and the same tests so that parents will have more information about where they want their children to attend school.
And the next question is just, I guess I'm hitting you with some quick questions here because I know we're coming to the end of our time period. But are our schools safe in North Carolina? If you had to just look at it overall right now, do you feel comfortable that our schools are safe for our children to attend?
Yeah. We can always do better. We need to be vigilant, but our public schools are among the safest places our children can be.
Well, and I think one of the things is because a lot of people's been looking at it. I know you've been going around the state and talking to folks about what they need to do. And in this budget year, there was some money put in for various monitoring devices and some things working with police officers. Yes,
there's a panic alarm system that can be funded. Safety resource officers can be placed in our school. I mean, additional safety resource officers. We have to go through a process of getting those dollars to schools. And many times the safety issues or the safety practices that we have, we don't like to talk about them a lot because we don't want the people who may do harm to our children know about them.
One quick question, and this is a question that always comes up when I'm talking to anybody about education, writing skills. Are we going to not teach writing, mechanical, basic writing skills in schools anymore? Is that something going by the wayside or something you still see that's important?
In state legislation that was passed this year and in our Common Core in writing is the standard that all children shall learn how to write in cursive.
Well, I'm sure we've got some listeners out there that just have a sigh of relief because that was a big concern I had from a number of folks that was concerned about writing. We'll give you a few seconds to wrap up. Anything that we missed that you want to say about maybe 10, 20 seconds here?
Yeah. I am so pleased that North Carolina has an all-time high graduation rate. Our graduation rate is nearly 83%, and that is a tribute to all of the wonderful work of our teachers, principals, and our support people in our public schools. And we should be celebrating the wonderful work that our teachers and principals do every day.
Again, thank Dr. June Atkins for being with us today, and a shout out again to all those teachers out there that do such a great job in our classroom. We'll see you again next week on the radio.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question or comment regarding this or any episode, please send your email questions and or comments to jwsimmonsedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday afternoon beginning at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.